Alrighty, hello everyone. We have officially reached class number 10. If you're still with us, then thank you, for joining us for all 10 of these classes, and hopefully you're learning a lot from these. Just kind of a recap of our last class, in case you don't remember, we kind of went over the basics of how in the world does, a method work. What do we have to do in order to, properly make a method, how we're going to properly use a method, and, etc. basically, right? So, first of all, we want to really understand, right, like what the use of a method is, and hopefully in the past couple of classes you've kind of been able to discover exactly what you're supposed to do with it. And in these examples that we have over here, it's the basis of code reuse. If you've been with us in any of the past past classes, like not this Java course, but in our Python course, then you will quickly understand the fact that these these methods are the code reuse in them is like a gift that you should use as much as you can, because it saves you so much time, right? Try and get in the habit of, whenever you do any sort of programming, even if it's as simple as printing something out, or like something simple like just adding hello to something like that, right? You should just go ahead and automatically try and put into a method, because the more you practice it, the easier and easier it becomes. Now, I mentioned last week that we might get started on CodingBat, and I believe that we will do CodingBat this week. CodingBat is a series of exercises featuring a bunch of Java principles, and hopefully I've taught you enough about some of the basics that the first few sections should not be too challenging. For now, we want to just go ahead and start off with some of the basics. So how are you going to do this? Well, first of all, we need to go ahead and head over to CodingBat, and I will share my screen. Alright, so this is what CodingBat looks like, and once you're finished with CodingBat, it should look like that, right? So, probably doesn't look like that right now because you haven't done them yet, but by the end of this class, it should look like this, right? So, we're going to start off with our, no solutions inside here. We're going to start off with warm-up 1, sleep in. So, for these warm-up questions, you are going to have a couple of things. First of all, you can show your solution. I would recommend that you don't go ahead and do this off the bat, obviously, because I want you guys to try and figure out exactly how to do this yourselves, and then I want you to look at the solution and see is there any way you can make it more efficient. Your solution, obviously. Sometimes you can make like the actual solution more efficient, but that's pretty rare and pretty hard to do, so I would not suggest it. Instead, just look at your code and see what are the differences, what can I do better, and that kind of stuff, right? And now you're probably wondering, alright, what does a method have to do with any of this? What a method has to do is essentially, first of all, we have to look at what are we given. We're given instructions, we're given cases, and in case you don't remember this, we did go over a couple of these questions before, I believe. I believe it was this one exactly, and we are given this method title, right? This is all that we are given. Now, based on what we have here, we can determine, alright, this looks oddly familiar, and it should look very oddly familiar, and that's because it is essentially just a method, right? And in this case, this method is a little bit special because you are not going to be calling it. Although it is defined everything as a method, you are never going to have to call it, because that's simply how it is graded instead. Alright, so we will go ahead and I'll go ahead and kind of just explain some of these headings over here before you can go ahead and get started on this first question. So first of all, you notice that it says public and there is no static here. So what does that mean, right? Well, essentially, the best way I can put this is these words like public and static, you don't actually need to say some of these keywords because they are assumed, right? It's kind of like a base state, right? It's like throughout the day, you don't want food, but the only time you do want food, then your body will tell you, I want food, right? But if you don't want food, your body won't tell you, I don't want food. I don't know if that analogy makes sense to you, but essentially, you don't always have to put something in place of public static Boolean, right? Instead, you can just leave out static, and it will assume that it is a static function. So essentially, this technically reads public static Boolean sleep in, right? So in case you don't remember, public refers to whether or not you can access it inside or outside the file. In this case, it really does not matter because everything's going to be inside this one file. Second of all, you have Boolean here, and Boolean is going to be your return type, right? In this case, if you read the question correctly and you look at all the cases here, you can easily notice the fact that, well, all these cases are becoming, true or false, meaning that our output is going to have to be Boolean only. Hopefully that makes sense to you. You should be able to figure this out both based on this function header here as well as the instructions that you are given. And then we want to go ahead and focus on our name. So the name can vary completely. It really does not matter, but in this case, obviously the name is given to you, and in this case, actually, the name does matter in this case particularly, but it doesn't matter in general as long as you remember your method name. Instead, it's important that you remember essentially, you can't change this part essentially here, because and the reasoning behind why you can't change it is actually purely because when you go ahead and you call this method, or rather not you, but when this program calls this method, right, it's essentially going ahead and saying, alright, well, I made this method for you. Now you go ahead and you just edit whatever's inside here, but don't touch anything on the outside. That's essentially what's happening. Alright, so you are not touching the outside of it. You're just editing inside. Alright, and finally we have our parameters. So parameters is going to be like the toughest part, as it's going to be the part that changes the most. I believe in every single one of your sections here, you will have public, whatever the return type is, and then you will have whatever method name you have. But other than that, there is no other change, so it's not going to be too hard to understand. The parameters is where it gets confusing, simply because, well, I'm pretty sure you guys haven't really dealt with many changes in parameters, so it might be a little bit awkward for you guys. But yeah, I don't think there's much other than that. So in this case, we'll go over some specific examples here before we go ahead and we move on. Right, so for now, we have two parameters, and the way you can determine the number of parameters is you look very closely and you look at all the commas. The commas separate the parameters, so the more commas you have, the more parameters you have. Hopefully that makes sense. It's like English, right? There's nothing really much different that they have here. Alright, so hopefully we've been able to establish this basis so we can move on. So now we go ahead and we look at these parameters in specific, and hopefully you will notice that we have a purple word and then we have a black word. Remember, purple words always mean keywords, right? And in this case, the keywords mean, well, the return type, right? Return type is going to be one of the most common keywords that you're going to see. Why is that? Probably because it's actually, I really don't know. It's like a simple return type. That's the best way I can put it. Other than that, there's not much variance you can have with it. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So in this case, it's Boolean, which means that your function, whatever is going on here, will return true or false, and it will only return true or false, right? Not to be confused with, it may return other things and stuff like that. So hopefully that makes sense. And now we're going to go ahead and move on. So now we're going to take a look at, all right, so at this point in time, we are given a couple pieces of information, right? We have these two variables here, but we don't entirely know what these two variables are for, what we're supposed to do with these two variables, things like that, right? And in this case, essentially what these two variables are going to be used for is, your inputs. And if you look closely at, your given inputs that you have, you'll see that they actually say, true, false, and, indicate that they're Boolean, first of all, but you need to know what they mean as well, right? You can't just have them and, try and guess what you're supposed to do with them, right? So in this case, what you're supposed to do is go ahead, read the instructions, and I'll give you guys about 2-3 minutes for that, and then I'll go ahead and explain them, because I can't really explain them if you don't know what the question is even asking. Alright, and I will go over kind of like the thinking pattern that you need in order to solve these questions effectively and all that kind of stuff. And then we'll go ahead and do examples. Alright, so hopefully that's long enough. I gave you a little bit extra time on this one because this is going to be your first problem. So now we're going to go ahead and go over how exactly do you do this. Alright, so your very first step after you read the instructions is that you should understand that whenever it mentions a word like parameter, you really need to pay attention to it, right? Hopefully that message got across, because I feel like that's like the most important thing, right? In this case, you are given parameter weekday and parameter vacation, right? If you can see them, there's one here and the other one is there. All right, now based off of this information, what are we going to do with this, right? How is this useful? Well, now that we're given a description of the variables, we can understand what these values mean, right? If you do math, like in general do math, the number 3 means nothing, right? But if you say 3 inches, it's a little bit better. Now you know like kind of what it's talking about, but you're still not quite entirely sure. However, if they go ahead and they go like instead of just 3 inches, they say like the perimeter of the box is 3 inches. Now you're given a little bit more context, right? And ultimately, this all comes down to one word: context, right? I already said it, but I guess that kind of spoiled it. But context is the most important thing. And I say this because oftentimes we accidentally tend to ignore it, simply because well, it doesn't seem needed at times, but you always want to have as much information as possible, right? The more information you have, the more easily you can manipulate the numbers. In this case, we look at this very closely and we can see, alright, 1 tells us whether or not it is a weekday, meaning that if it is true, it is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, and if it is false, it is Saturday or Sunday. And second of all, we are given that our whether or not we are on vacation. Alright, so hopefully that makes sense to you, and if you want any more verification with this, you can kind of just go ahead and look at this, right? And yeah, that's pretty much it. So in this case, you'll notice so for this one, I'm just going to copy the solution very fast just so I can show you how this works. After you write your code inside these two brackets indicate the method. You need to make sure, first of all, you use weekday and vacation as according, right? And hopefully you'll understand this. I'll go over the solution in a second. But the way you check your code is you go ahead and you click run, right? And you'll notice every single time you run, you have the exact same cases, but please don't hard code the cases, especially as you get farther on. The pieces of code tend to get longer and longer and longer, and there's no point in bothering yourself with trying to hard code, because you're not, the entire point of this is learning. There's no real reason, right? So now we're going to go ahead and we are going to go over the solution for this. So it says return true if we sleep in. Alright, that is the ultimate basis. So no matter what happens, we need to return true when we sleep in. And we're also given the information that we sleep in if it is not a weekday or we are on vacation. So it says it almost completely explicitly for us. Not a weekday. So if not weekday or vacation, right? If you read this out, that's quite literally exactly what it means. Then we return true. And we return false if it is not true. So, alright. We go ahead and we run this and we can see that we get all of the cases. Hopefully this makes sense to you. Yeah, there's not really much else to this. So at this point, I'll give you, typically my format with this is I will give you guys another 2 minutes at the end for you guys to ask any questions you might have, on top of just trying to understand what the code I just wrote is. I will try to vary these times based on how hard I believe this code is, but at the moment we are going to be focusing on CodingBat for the next couple of classes because it is just such great practice for you, and actually letting you guys do the code beforehand and having me explain it afterwards is like probably the best way to learn, because it's just kind of like I'm like an answer key to you essentially, especially after there is no more show solution. Like you'll notice it's in warm-up 1, it's in warm-up 2 as well, I believe, right? You can still see the solution here, but when you get to the farther ones like this, there is no show solution, right? Instead you might have a hint. Some of them you don't even have a hint, right? You just have to go ahead and program the code. So you notice we got our little check mark here, and so that means that we have finished sleep in. So you can go ahead inside here, you can go ahead and just click next, and you will go to the next problem. And this one is going to be monkey trouble. So again, I will go back here. I'll give you guys 2 minutes to go ahead and look the solution over before we move on to the next problem. 2 minutes. Alrighty, hopefully this was enough time, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next problem now. Again, I will give you guys 2 minutes to read over this problem before I go over our thinking process here. And I will try to use the same template of thinking every single time, because repetition, not changing this kind of thinking process is the best way I can possibly think of in order for you to kind of learn this process yourself and apply it as fast as you can. For these first couple of classes, I don't even expect you to get these problems because it's hard to understand these problems from a word problem perspective sometimes. But these are real programming problems, and you will experience problems like these and when you go ahead and you do programming for yourself. So 2 minutes. And this is likely the last problem that we do for today. Alright, hopefully that was enough time for you to go ahead and read the problem. So we'll go ahead and get started on this. So first thing we want to do is we want to look at this. So again, we ignore public and boolean because they're going to be consistently the same. Well, I mean boolean is not actually. My bad. I ignore public, not boolean. Boolean is a return type. So whatever we return here has to be a boolean value. Next thing we do is Monkey Trouble's our name, so we can ignore that, but we look at our parameters, A smile and B smile. We go ahead and we look at the instructions. First thing we see, we have two monkeys, A and B, so we can kind of assume A smile and B smile are referring to these, right? And the parameters indicate if each is smiling. Well, we guessed right, I guess, right? So we are in trouble if both of them are smiling or if neither of them are smiling. Return true if we are in trouble. So it gives us our cases clearly, and so it says if A smile is equal to true and B smile is equal to true, and in this case we don't want to use the word and, but we want to use our keywords here, and A smile is equal to false and B smile is equal to false, right? Then we go ahead and we return true overall, right? So essentially this is saying if both A smile and B smile are true, or if both A smile and B smile are false, which means that if both of them are smiling or if neither of them are smiling, right? Then we go ahead and return true. We go ahead and whoops, we need our semicolon. We go ahead and we get all our cases correct. Good progress, right? Now, I went through this relatively fast, but first thing you should do before you go ahead and you run your first entry of Go is you should go ahead and check it using these cases. I did not go ahead and do that in my logic because I've done these types of problems so often. I know that the logic I used here is correct. However, it is important for you guys to do it because you guys don't quite have that experience yet. So we go ahead and we run this through. We see true, true, and we see that it satisfies this, meaning that it returns true. For false, false, it satisfies this, so we return true again. And true, false does not satisfy either of these, so we return false. Now, in this case, there's a little bit of a special property here. We can simplify this. And in this case, the way we go ahead and we simplify it is we go ahead and we just say equals equals instead of and. Because honestly, these values are the same, so there's no reason whatsoever why we cannot do this, right? So we go ahead and we do this, and oh yeah, never mind. We have a little bit of a problem with parentheses. Okay, don't use this method. It's a little bit shaky at the moment, but here's the solution that CodingBat provides here. I have to figure out the parentheses for that other method, but there is no need for simplification there. It's just kind of a cool thing to do, I guess. Again, most times in programming you don't need to simplify unless you have like something like print 5, print 6, print 7, print 8, print 9, print 10, right? Then you can just loop that. Things like that. Code reuse is the biggest idea in programming. With that, you know, I'll leave this up for you guys. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them. If not, then I'll see you guys next week. Alright, it looks like no one has any questions. So thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you guys next week.